Good night from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. The increasingly embattled British Prime Minister Theresa May on Friday, May the 24th, 2019, tearfully announced her resignation after nearly 3 years at the helm of the British cabinet. She had been criticized by many fellow Conservatives for not being able to negotiate a good exit deal with the European Union. It had already been rejected, I think, in 3 votes. And finally, having decided that her continuance in office would not be politically feasible because of the growing opposition to her continued premiership inside her own party and even among the voters at large, that it would be wiser to announce the resignation rather than risk, for example, a humiliating non-confidence motion in the British Parliament. Incidentally, the last British Prime Minister who effectively was forced to resign by a non-confidence motion was the late Labour Prime Minister James Callaghan back in 1979. The first female British Prime Minister who, just like Mrs. May, was a Conservative, Margaret Thatcher, was effectively stabbed in the back by many of her party colleagues in November 1990. Michael Heseltine, a former cabinet minister, had announced that he would challenge Prime Minister Thatcher for the Conservative leadership and therefore for the prime ministership. She did win the first vote, but she fell 4 votes short of the overall 15% majority, that is 57.5% of the Conservative members in the British House of Commons. And therefore, a second ballot was scheduled. Initially, the late Prime Minister Thatcher announced that she would stand on the second ballot. However, she wanted to make sure that her cabinet colleagues, her fellow ministers, were supporting her, and therefore she privately discussed this issue with them individually. And most of them said, albeit in hedged prose, that they doubted if she could win, although most promised to support her should she stand on the second ballot. The first cabinet colleague to see her, Kenneth Clarke, bluntly told him that she would be soundly defeated should she stand on the second ballot. And having concluded that she could no longer rely on the support of a sufficient number of fellow Conservative members of the House of Commons, she announced her resignation. And then a man who back then was her favorite for her successor, Chancellor of the Exchequer John Major, announced that he would seek the leadership alongside Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd and former Cabinet Minister Michael Heseltine, and of course the rest is history. We know that Major received almost half of the votes on the second ballot with no abstainers, absentees, or spoiled ballots. Ironically, he received 19 votes fewer than the already outgoing Prime Minister Thatcher had received on the first ballot. But since it was clear that he would win a third ballot, Heseltine and Hurd immediately and graciously conceded. There will be a major battle for the British Conservative Party's leadership and therefore for the prime ministership. Boris Johnson, the former British Foreign Secretary, is one of the leading candidates. In the worst case scenario, there can be several ballots, or at least 2 or 3, and then whoever wins will only have a slight majority and will have to contend with an organized minority in the ranks of the British Conservative Party's caucus or parliamentary group. This could benefit the Labour Party, except that many British voters are fed up with politics as usual, and of course this could fuel the Scottish secessionist movement, which already was able to organize one independence referendum back in September 2014, although with a 10% majority it was defeated, with only 45% of the participating Scottish voters supporting independents and 55%, many of them older Scots, opposing it. Okay, let's go to the story. Well, some statistics for you. Theresa May was born in October 1956, so she's 62 years old. She became the British Prime Minister in July 2016 following the resignation of her predecessor, David Cameron, and that followed the slight defeat that the Remain side suffered in the June 2016 Brexit referendum, with 52% of the participating British voters casting their ballots in favor of the Leave option. She served as the British Home Secretary, or in the general parliamentary vernacular, Interior Minister from May 2010 until July 2016. She furthermore served as the Minister for Women and Equalities from May 2010 until September 2012. She also served as the chairwoman of the British Conservative Party from July 2002 until November 2003. Since May 1997, she has been a member of the British House of Commons for Maidenhead. She was born in Eastbourne, Sussex. She has been married to Philip May. Her alma mater was St. Hugh's College, Oxford. Interestingly enough, she's maybe the first British Prime Minister to openly announce that she suffers from diabetes. Okay. According to The Independent, which is a major British daily newspaper, Prime Minister May broke down in tears when announcing her resignation. In an emotionally charged statement on the doorstep of 10 Downing Street, which is the official residence for the British prime ministers, Prime Minister May announced that she would quit as the British Conservative leader on June the 7th, 2019. But that she will remain as Prime Minister until her successor is elected. Watched by husband Philip, Prime Minister May's voice cracked as she said it had been the honor of her life to serve as the British Prime Minister, and she felt enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country that she loves, meaning Britain. In an apparent warning to the Conservative Party not to pursue a no-deal Brexit after she goes, she said her successor will need to pursue compromise to find a way of delivering the result of the 2016 referendum and taking the United Kingdom out of the European Union in a way that protects jobs, security, and the Union. The contest to find a new Tory leader will begin in the week after her departure, and the victor will be announced before Parliament breaks up for the summer in July 2019. The timing allows her to host US President Donald Trump's state visit to the UK from June the 3rd to 5th and take part in the commemorations of the 75th anniversary of D-Day in Portsmouth and Normandy, that is on June the 6th, before the race to replace her gets underway in earnest. Some of the likely contenders for the successor were among the first to pay tribute to May. Boris Johnson, one of the frontrunners, hailed a very dignified statement, adding, "Thank you for your stoical service to our country and the Conservative Party." It is now time to follow her urgings to come together and deliver Brexit. Dominic Raab said, dignified as ever, Theresa May showed her integrity. She remains a dedicated public servant, patriot, and loyal Conservative. But Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn said that Mrs. May had shown herself unable to govern and her administration had utterly failed the country over Brexit and is unable to improve people's lives. He called for her successor to call an immediate general election. Prime Minister May's dramatic announcement came after the chair of the Conservatives' backbench 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady, met her on Downing Street to demand a timetable for her departure. Standing at a lectern outside the famous Black Door to number 10 Downing Street, Prime Minister May said that as Prime Minister she had done her best to negotiate a deal to take Britain out of the European Union in a way that protects jobs, security, and our union. But she added, I have done everything I can to convince MPs to back that deal. Sadly, I have not been able to do so. I tried 3 times. I believe it was right to persevere even when the odds against success seemed high. But it is now clear to me that it is in the best interests of the country for a new Prime Minister to lead that effort. Speaking a day after European elections in which the Conservatives are believed to have slumped to their worst performance in their history, Prime Minister May insisted that the party can renew itself in the years ahead. She cited progress in reducing the deficit, meaning the budget deficit, rising jobs figures, the introduction of an industrial strategy, house building funding for mental health, the race disparity audit, and action to tackle plastic waste as the legacy of the decent, moderate, and patriotic government which she led. Her voice cracking, she concluded, our politics may be under strain, but there is so much that is good about this country, so much to be proud of, so much to be optimistic about. I will shortly leave the job that it has been the honor of my life to hold, the second female Prime Minister, but certainly not the last. I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love. Shortly afterwards, she left Downing Street by car with Philip, apparently heading for her constituency home in Berkshire. May's widely forecast departure came after a cabinet revolt against her latest Brexit plan, unveiled on Tuesday, May the 21st, 2019, which offered a set of concessions in the hope of winning a cross-party majority in the Commons. The toxic detail which sealed her fate was the offer of a Commons vote on whether to hold a second Brexit referendum, with the promise that, if approved by members of Parliament, no European Union withdrawal settlement could be ratified without a final say ballot. This sparked a wave of angry Tory members of Parliament to withdraw their support, and a string of cabinet ministers to demand changes to the bill. Foreign Secretary, meaning Foreign Minister, of course, Jeremy Hunt, delivered the final blow on Thursday, May the 23rd, by telling the Prime Minister to her face that she must kill the bill. Members of Parliament in Westminster were already lining up behind rival candidates for the leadership. Would-be Tory leaders must first win their way through a series of members of Parliament's votes in June 2019 to get onto a short list of 2. The final pair of contenders will take part in a series of hustings around Britain before a ballot of the 125,000-strong party membership. Former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson is hot favorite among activists, but is likely to face a challenge for the British Conservative members of Parliament's votes from Mr. Hunt, Environment Secretary Michael Gove, former Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab, and Andrea Leadsom, whose resignation as leader of the Commons on Wednesday, May the 22nd, helped push Prime Minister May over the brink. Other contenders could include Health Secretary Matt Hancock, Defence Secretary Penny Mordaunt, International Development Secretary Rory Stewart, and former Work and Pensions Secretary Esther McVeigh. By holding on to her position until the summer, Prime Minister May ensured that she will overtake Gordon Brown's record of 2 years and 319 days in office next Wednesday, and is likely to pass the 3-year mark as Prime Minister on July the 13th. Anyway, she can be considered, for those of you who are interested in political history, as yet another transitional British Prime Minister, such as the following ones, if we only include the ones who have served since the Second World War ended in 1945. The first one of them, of course, would be Sir Alec Douglas Hume, who only served as Prime Minister for 1 year, from October 1963 to October 1964. His predecessor, Harold Macmillan, had been able to lead the party to a clear majority in the 1959 British general election, but had by 1961 started to lose the public's confidence because of a number of negative news stories, a number of political mistakes and scandals, the latest of which the Profumo scandal involving the British Defense Secretary, if I remember correctly, having an affair with the so-called call girl, a young female prostitute, and then, of course, the inflamed prostate gland from which he was suffering, and the bad medical advice according to which he needed an immediate operation. Sir Alec Douglas Hume was much more successful in foreign policy. Indeed, he served as the Foreign Secretary in the subsequent Heath government from 1970 to 1974. Another transitional Prime Minister, of course, would be James Callaghan, so far the latest British Prime Minister to be directly defeated by a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons. Then, obviously, Gordon Brown would be considered a transitional Prime Minister. He was in office for 3 years, 2007 to 2010. After losing the 2010 British parliamentary election, he had to make way for David Cameron, and then now Theresa May. One just wonders if this will be a general future trend in the British politics, that there will be these 1, 2, or 3 year prime ministers instead of, for example, 4, 6, or 8 year prime ministers. Stay tuned.